So, based on this little axe I've got here, who do you think first figured out how to tap maple trees? Any guesses?
Native Americans.
Native Americans, that's right. So there's a couple different theories as to how it was discovered. Probably the most popular one is a Native American was walking from one village to another, and it was late in the year, and he sat under a tree, a big shady tree, and sunk his tomahawk into the base of the tree, like that. And when he woke up, there was a pool of water next to him. So after walking for a long day, he was very, very thirsty. He reached down, took a sip, and it tasted sweet to him. Now to us, if you were to taste sap straight out of a tree right now, it would probably just taste like straight up water. That's because we've had stuff like sugar and ice cream, sugar and soda. So to them, it would have tasted very sweet, but to us, we probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Now, there's a couple different ways you can tap trees. The way the Native Americans did it, as well as the early colonists, is they would take wooden buckets before metalworking came around. This particular bucket is made from a birch tree, but you can make it from other trees. Does anybody know what a bucket maker is called?
Cooper.
Cooper, that's right, yeah. So you would have a guy in a village and his whole job would be to make buckets. He lived for buckets. That was his only purpose. Now there is a couple issues with using a wooden bucket versus a metal bucket. Now first of all, as you guys can tell, it doesn't have a lid, right? So yeah, bugs get in there, leaves, stuff you do not want in your maple syrup. So you can make a wooden lid. But the other issue was, over time, with the temperature, with the buckets freezing and then defrosting and getting wet, the wood over time would warp. So there were a couple tricks to fixing this. They eventually figured out a way to preserve the lining on the inside. They covered it with a certain kind of paint. Does anybody want to take a guess as to what kind of paint they used?
Lead paint.
Yeah, lead paint. Yes, that's what we want. Just a nice help in the lead in your maple syrup. Nothing wrong with that. We're not really sure how many people died of lead-induced maple syrup poisoning, but now, as far as the tapping goes, that's fine there. You will typically take a drill just like this, and you just crank it, and it goes into the tree. Now, you don't want to go too far in the tree. You typically go in about 2.5 to 3 inches. And then what you do is, what we typically use today and what a lot of hobbyists use is just a metal spile made for metalworking. But what the Native Americans would use, is a tree called the staghorn sumac. You recognize it because they've got this furry little bit at the end here. And the thing about the staghorn sumac is it's actually very soft on the inside. It's got a soft pith. So, what you can do is, Rich here's going to show you, is they would take a piece of metal or a very hot stone, and they would run it right through the center of the staghorn sumac. And what that's going to do is that's going to give you a tube to run the maple syrup out of. And that's going to run straight into your collection bucket. So, who do you think makes the most maple syrup in the world? Any guesses?
Quebec.
Good. Yeah, exactly. Canada, Quebec. They're very proud of it. If you look at Canada,
I'm from Quebec.
All right, there you go. Yeah, they're very proud of it, as they should be. They produce more maple syrup than anybody else in the world. It shows they got the sugar maple leaf on their national flag. Does anybody know who the top producer in the U.S. is? Vermont. That's right. Yeah. So they're very proud of it as well. They've gone. If you look at the Vermont State Quarter. There is a scene of the family tapping a maple tree. Now there are about 15 states in the U.S. currently that produce maple syrup. Most of those are going to be up in like New England or places like Michigan. Any guesses as to where Maryland is on the list? 15. No, no better than that. 10. Thank you. That's very nice. No, so we're about 13th in terms of production. We're not last. We prefer quality over quantity. They're probably one of the most southernmost states in the U.S. that produces it. Virginia does produce it, and I've been recently told that there is one producer in North Carolina now. So, but for the most part, you got to be up far north. Now, there's a couple reasons for why it's so much better to produce in the north. Number one is just climate. You typically want warm days and cool nights in the early start of the year. So you have about roughly 2 months to produce maple syrup. You can start in very late January, and typically for a good season you can end in early March. Now the reason you need warm days and cool nights is because that sap actually travels up and down a tree trunk. So on a warm day, that sap travels up the tree's body, up towards the leaves and the branches up top, to feed the leaves and the branches. And then at night, as the temperature decreases, that's going to all go down. When all that sap goes down the tree, it's going to empty out into your buckets. So some years, if you don't have a very good year, if it's a really, really warm winter or a really, really cold winter, you might not get any sap at all, to be honest. So a lot of times what producers will do is if they have a very good year, they'll store the excess maple syrup in just a storage facility. Because you can actually store, until you expose it to air, until you open that bottle, you can actually store maple syrup indefinitely. So, we're going to do a little consumer quiz here, if you guys don't mind. For a while, maple syrup was more popular than cane syrup. Now that we have, smoke dance here. Now that we have, established relations with countries that are more tropical, it's easier to import cane syrup. You can also grow it in a couple of the states, part of the South. I believe Florida and Louisiana produce it. So number one is climate. You can't grow cane sugar in New England, but you also can't grow maple trees or produce maple syrup in Florida, so there's that. But the other reason was for slavery reasons. In the 1800s, most of the cane syrup farms in the South were produced via slave labor versus in the North, where a lot of the employees were actually free slaves through the abolition movement that worked on the maple syrup farms. So that's one reason why maple syrup was more common. We also have 100% pure maple syrup. I wonder what's in there. So if you haven't guessed already, it is 100% pure maple syrup. Now you can't say that it's 100% pure maple syrup unless it is. But typically, any guesses as to how much 1 gallon of pure maple syrup costs? $60. There you go, yeah. So 1 gallon of pure legitimate maple syrup costs about $60 right now in the market. This story happened a couple years ago, but it still makes me laugh every time I read it. In Canada, there was a couple criminals were arrested. They found out that they were selling bootleg maple syrup. They were selling it illegally, and I believe they ended up making close to $2 billion. I'm not quite sure. I don't buy my maple syrup from a shady guy in the alley, so I don't know who they were selling it to, but clearly they were selling it. Now, I get a lot of questions as to how maple syrup tastes. Like, what's the difference between the colors? How does the taste matter? Well, there's a couple of things with this. So typically, as I showed you before, when it comes straight out of the tree, it's mostly water, right? And water, as you guys know, is clear. So this is typically what it looks like straight from the start. And as we slowly boil it down more and more, it's going to evaporate the water, and all those sugars are going to sit at the bottom and slowly start to combine into the syrup.
No, sir.
Now, typically what you want, or what most people seem to like, is this right here. This is what we call grade A, or Vermont Fancy. The rating has actually changed as of 2018, but it's fairly similar. This is typically the best, well, arguably best syrup. This is what you put on the table when your in-laws are coming into town. And you got grade A, which is like a medium one. That's still pretty sweet. It's just got a hint of a smoky flavor. And down here we have amber and dark. This is typically what you refer to more as a cooking syrup or a meat syrup. I know some people put this on their meats and use them to smoke meats. But they're all consumable. They're all safe to eat. It just varies as far as taste. So, does anybody know what temperature water boils at? Probably 212. That's right. I'm glad somebody knew that because until a couple weeks ago. The temperature we need to boil down the syrup is 219, so a couple degrees above that. For us, it's just the line that says syrup on the thermometer. We've got it all figured out. Lastly, we also have a hydrometer. Anybody know what this does? That's right, yeah. It measures the ratio of water to material. Excellent question. So, as far as tapping the trees go, it is a renewable process. Typically, after every couple of years, you want to move your tap over a little bit. Now, as far as age goes, the tree has to be at least 10 inches in diameter before you can tap it. For reference, a tree that's that wide is about 10 years old. So, like, this is about 10 inches here, so that's the size of the tree you would tap. Now, for every 5 additional inches, you can add one more tap. So, if I have a tree that's 20 inches in diameter, I can actually have 3 taps going at the same time. Then, as far as the species goes, typically what you tap are sugars, reds, silver, and black maples. Now there is a reason sugar maple is the most popular, because they have the highest sugar to water ratio right off the bat. It's about 3% sugars, 97% water. So the more sugar maples you tap and the more you use sap from sugar maples, the higher the sugar content. You can, it doesn't affect flavor or anything like that, but it will affect how much sugar you get out of the trees. So if I were to tap mostly black maples, I'd probably have to tap a lot if I wanted a lot of sugar.
So all the syrups taste the same?
That's right, yeah. Yeah, taste is only determined by how long you process the syrup, not the species. I had a couple questions about this earlier, and the question was, can you tap other trees? And the answer is yes, but with some stipulations. Number one, don't go out in your yard and tap every tree because there are some trees you can't eat. One tree, the only other tree that's pretty commonplace in North America that you tap is a lot of people these days are starting to tap birch trees. I'm not very familiar with the process. I have had birch sap before. In my opinion, it tastes very similar to maple syrup. You're just sort of missing that mapley smoky flavor. Well, a lot of people, you can use this as a substitute for pancakes. But I get a lot of people ask me, I have Norway maple or Japanese maple in my garden. Can I tap those? And the answer is no, because the only trees that actually produce sap that's usable for actual maple syrup are found in North America. So the 4 trees I listed earlier, sugars, reds, all those guys, those are the trees that you would tap to produce actual maple syrup. Pretty much all trees produce a sap. But Norway's and Japanese maples, their sap is more like a toxic sap, not something you would want to consume. Another thing about maple trees is they are actually what we refer to as a keystone species. Does anybody know what that means, just out of curiosity? So a keystone species is a plant or animal where if it were to disappear from the ecosystem, other animals and plants would disappear as well. Just a couple examples here in the park. We have a species of moth called the rosy maple moth. It is a tiny pink and yellow moth. If maple trees were to disappear, they would disappear as well because this moth needs maple leaves in order to lay its eggs. The caterpillars of the moth will only eat maple trees. There is also a bird species called the yellow-bellied sapsucker. I promise I did not make that up. That's its name. It is a small species of woodpecker, and 85% of its diet is tree sap. We don't have them here currently at this moment. They're migratory species, but if you come back in the springtime, like April or March, you'll start to see them here eating sap. And that's another example of another animal where if we didn't have maple trees in the environment, you probably wouldn't see them. But all in all, that covers just about everything. If you guys have any more questions, me and the other staff members would be happy to help.
I have a question just about how do you tell the difference between the maple trees?
Is
it leaves?
Yeah, it's the leaves.
It's a leaf
Everybody
color.
I've asked, the best time to tell the trees apart, the easiest way to tell the trees apart is in the fall, because the tree, it'll be different colors, so it'll be different colors. I think typically reds and sugars, their leaves will typically be more like a red color or bright orange, whereas blacks and silvers will be more like a yellow or a light orange.
Okay.
That's the explanation I've been given.
How about the bark? Aren't the sugars a shaggier bark versus the smooth bark?
Yeah, that's the other explanation I've been given, but that's not I've seen some black maples that have like shaggy bark too, so I'm not sure that's entirely true.
And we have all the 4.
Yeah, we have all 4. Typically, as far as soil goes, sugars and reds like moisture soil, black and silvers less damp soil. So like I said earlier, we have mostly red sugar maples.
What's that one right there? The smooth bark. The
That
smooth bark.
is a red.
That's a red.
Yeah, so most of what we tap down here is red and sugars because we're right by the lake.
Where are they?
They are all over on North Beach. If you guys can take the hayride, they'll actually show them where they're at.
And is it too late? Like if you haven't put any in yet, is it too late to?
Yeah, we're about done here.
Oh, really?
I like to say that the best time to tap trees is when you have annual maple syrup. So typically you want to start. We started in Valentine's Day.
Oh, no kidding.
So you can tap anywhere from late January to early March.
Really?
So you have a good year.
So it isn't worth doing. It isn't worth trying.
I wouldn't try now. No.
All right.
So she's over there.